historians, welcome. This is Guided Notes lesson 9.1, and today we are talking about the French Revolution as we continue in our series of nationalism and revolution. So let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so in this particular unit we're looking at analyzing the extent to which the Enlightenment impacted not only the American but also the French Revolution, but then also being able to summarize those important events and what caused the French Revolution and how it affected France in the end, right? Alright, so these are your vocabulary words. So again, if you're doing that vocabulary activity, you can take a look at these vocabulary words. These will help you with that vocabulary activity. You have a state. Please note that a state in this case is a state as in a class or social economic system in France, and not a state as in a piece of land. Okay, so that's the way we're referencing a state here. Then you have bourgeoisie. That's the way you say that word, and that's kind of where that slang came from when we say somebody's bad and bougie. Yeah, so that's where it comes from. Bourgeois or bourgeoisie was kind of the middle class, and sans-culottes is French for without breeches, and those were members of the Paris Commune who saw themselves as patriots, and we'll talk more about them later. All right. Okay, so your answer for number one, okay, the Estates General was actually social economic classes or social classes within France. Okay, so that blank that you're looking for, that's what you're looking for at the end. Namely, I would say to say socio-economic classes, because they were broken up not only in social class but specifically by economic classes. Okay, and the Estates General, there were three estates. Okay, you had the first estate, the second estate, and the third estate. Okay, and as you see here, I have different numbers, right? So for part A, the first estate was the estate that made up the clergy, or the pastors, the priests, the cardinals, and so forth of the Roman Catholic Church. However, 2% of their income went to taxes. Okay, just 2%. Part B, the second estate, was made up of the rich nobles that held the highest offices in government. Guess how much of their taxes of their income went to taxes? Zilch. Zero. Nothing. Okay, just they did not pay a single dime of taxes to France, but they own 20% of the land in France. Okay, so that's the second estate. And then here, the last estate was the third estate. The third estate was 97% of the population, as you see here in this pie chart, but 50% of their income went to taxes to help fund the government. 50%. So based on what you learn here about the first estate, the second estate, and the third estate, guess which estate is going to be the most angry in terms of the tax structure? And if you said the third estate, you're absolutely correct. The third estate was upset, mainly because most of them were bourgeois, the bourgeoisie, the lower class, urban lower class, and peasant farmers. Most of them did not have that kind of money to give in taxes, so they're going to be upset. And this, as you see here for number 3, this was the major cause of the French Revolution, that inequality or that unbalancing of the tax structure in France. Okay, so that's your answers for number 1, number 2, part A, B, C, and number 3. Okay, so in this particular one, this is something for you to do based on what we just talked about. You're going to look at this painting and determine what each figure represents in each painting. Which one of these figures or these people represent the first estate? Who represents the second estate? And who represents the third estate? Okay, and which estate, based on this picture, you think is carrying the heaviest burden? And why do you think the artist depicted the estates in that manner? Go ahead and write down your thoughts, and I'll address that in a few. Okay, so based on this painting, and if you answered this in Edpuzzle as well, awesome. If you said that the first estate was the clergy, you're absolutely right. This is the first estate. This is the second estate, and this would be the third estate that's circled here. Okay, now the estate that's carrying the heaviest burden would be the third estate, which is this man right here. And possibly the reason why the artist depicted the estates in this manner, because they wanted to show and persuade and show the French society how much of a burden the third estate was carrying in France. And literally, quite literally, as you see here, he's almost on his last leg. The third estate is literally holding France, the entire government or monarchy of France, on his shoulders, and it's about to buckle. He's about to fall, right? So that kind of shows the amount of the amount of burden that the third estate had, and also how much the French government was about to crumble based on its own financial troubles, right? So that's pretty much what we would see here in terms of this depiction of this painting. All right, good. Let's move on. Okay, so this is Louis XVI of France. His grandfather was the Sun King, which we know of as King Louis XIV. That's the one that built the palace in Versailles in Paris, right? That big elaborate palace that he built for himself. However, with all of that buying and splurging and so forth that his grandfather did and his father did, he inherited a lot of debt from all of them, okay, which became a problem for him and led to the revolution as well, okay. And also, if you recall, when we talked about the American Revolution, he borrowed a lot of money in order to help the American revolutionaries in the American Revolutionary War. This doubled the government's debt. So all of this is the causes of how King Louis XVI aided the French Revolution, or he gave way to the French Revolution because of all of these issues. Okay. And also for number 7, the Enlightenment started to challenge his idea, because he took this idea from his grandfather and his father of divine right of kings, and that passed through the generations to him. But the Enlightenment is going to challenge that and say, no, I don't think we need to have an absolute monarch or an absolute king anymore. Okay, so with that said, King Louis XVI is going to come up to a lot of trouble with his own citizens, and it's going to tell. Okay, so let's move on. And of course, if you hear me talk about King Louis, I'll mention more in the class, but keep in mind that's a pretty good synopsis of who he is, and I will have more tidbits in class if you listen carefully about him as well. Alright, so this is Marie Antoinette of France. This was another one of King Louis XVI's problems. This was his wife, and they got married at a very young age, but because a lot of times marriages were arranged at that point. She was 14 upon marriage, and she became queen at 16. Okay. However, for your answer for number 8, she gave very poor advice. She spent tons of money, lavish stuff, gowns, jewels, her hair, her dresses, her parties. She was known for gambling. She was known for giving extravagant gifts and having, pretty dresses with ornate flowers on them, real flowers, right? So this is why she was called by the people of France Madame Deficit, right? She was highly unpopular. A lot of stuff that we'll go into in class. but she interfered in the government a lot and spending all of that money. So that became a big problem for France as well. And they kind of placed her face as the problems of France, debt and economic issues. So her face was kind of the poster child for that, which was, you know, not entirely her fault, but that's what she became known as. Okay. All right. So this is 9 and 10. Sorry. So in order for to alleviate or to help resolve France's debt and their economic situation, King Louis XVI called a meeting of the Estates General. Remember the 3 estates, right? To discuss how they can fix it. The third estate, that's your number 9, okay? So he called this meeting to try to help fix it. Number 10 is that the third estate wanted the clergy and which is your first and second estate to pay taxes. Remember, they're not paying, either they're not paying taxes or they're paying very little, right? However, when it came to the voting, traditionally each estate only had 1 vote. However, the third estate wanted to change that and demand that each deputy within each estate have a vote, right? Which would give them more power and more authority, right? So if that's the case and each deputy had a vote, now because there's more people in the third estate, they would have more say. The king didn't like that. He disagreed. Big problem. Okay. So that's your 9 and 10. And as you see here, this is a picture of the Estates General meeting, you know, in 1789. Okay. So with all of that being said, in June of 1789, the third estate boldly declared that this is ridiculous. We're not having our say. So they drafted or came together as a national assembly, and they swore an oath. Okay, and this oath was that they would meet and continue meeting in that same area to draft a new constitution for the people of France. Okay, and that oath was known as the tennis court oath. Okay, as you see here. So that's part of number 11. So this is why all of this is highlighted. So that oath that they swore was called the tennis court oath, and they swore that they would continue to meet in that same location until they drafted a new constitution. And this was important for France and the revolution because now people are seeing a different way of government, and they want to move from an absolute monarchy to having more of a democratic and having people participate in government more and having a say in their own government. So now government is going to switch. Okay, it's going to change drastically. All right, and that's your answer for number 12. All right, so number 13. This was kind of the symbol, the symbolism of the start. If you had to say a spark, this would be like the spark of the French Revolution. Okay. When King Louis XVI heard that there was a national assembly and that they were meeting to try to draft a new constitution, it was heard or hearsay, you know, people, you know how we drop tea or gossip. It was suggested, or some people said, that King Louis was going to use military force to stop the National Assembly. So Parisians, or Paris residents, people of Paris, peasants, unemployed Parisians, etc., they said, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to defend ourselves. And they stormed the Bastille, which was a jail in Paris, and they searched for gunpowder and arms to make sure that they defended themselves. So as I said, this storming of the Bastille and them trying to gain arms to defend themselves became like a symbol of revolution and a symbol of the French people taking back their own say in government. So up to this day, in France and in other territories that France owned, they celebrate July 14th as Bastille Day, to commemorate that act of revolution in France. Okay. All right, cool. All right, so this is 14 and 15. So on August 26th, the same National Assembly at that point were able to establish a new constitution. That new constitution was called the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen, which was very, very close to what the Declaration of Independence was like. A lot of the language was the same. As you see here for number 14, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen mentioned that all men were free and equal before the law. Appointment of public office should be based on talent, and no group should be exempt from taxation. So they wanted to make sure that everything was equal. As a matter of fact, one of the words that's mentioned during the French Revolution was liberté, égalité, fraternité, right? Which means liberty, fraternity, and brotherhood, right? So a lot of those ideals, and as you see here, that's 14 and 15, as I mentioned with the Enlightenment, freedom of speech, freedom of press. A lot of the things that you heard in the Declaration of Independence in America was also adapted for during the French Revolution in their Constitution, Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen. All right, so that's 14 and 15, as you see here. Okay, this is 16. So Parisian women had enough. They met with the king, some of them, but they marched to Versailles because they literally had enough. They had enough, and the king was ready to concede. The king was like, okay, I'm done with this, you know. They literally told him, like, our children are starving, we have no bread, there's inflation, the prices have increased so much that we can't buy the goods in order to make bread. You need to do something. And women, you know, women, when it comes to mothers, they're tough. Okay, they're not gonna back down. All right. So the crowd insisted that the royal family return to Paris. Okay, because at one point when all of this happened with the storming of Bastille and so forth, they fled and they went to Austria. But they demanded that his wife and children, because he had children now, his wife and children, they demanded that they return back to Paris, because he remained. His wife and children left to Austria, so they did come back. Okay. All right, so this is 17. Okay, so again, they set up a constitutional monarchy, but again, with political radicals that came up, they did not want a constitutional monarchy. They wanted more reform. So if you remember what a constitutional monarchy is that there is a king or a queen, and then you have a assembly or a legislative body that would make the laws. They did not want that. They wanted more reform. They wanted to get rid of the king and queen altogether. The royal family tried to flee France in a disguise, but somebody did some things. There was some chatter, you know, some snitching, and they got caught, and they were recognized and captured and brought back to Paris. And when they were brought back to Paris, that was the end of them, because they were tried and they were guillotined, which we'll find out a little bit more later. All right. So over some time, a lot of the European leaders surrounding France were afraid that the revolution would spread to their countries, particularly those of Austria, okay, and the King of Prussia. So they decided to threaten France that they would restore King Louis XVI to his full power of absolute monarch. When the Parisians heard about this, especially the Legislative Assembly, they was like, oh no, that cannot happen. So they became even more radical and even more violent, right? And hearing this attack, the Legislative Assembly decided to strike first, and they declared war on Austria in 1792. And that's your answer, part of your answer for number 19 as well. And here's the last answer for number 20. This was the rise of the Paris Commune. So again, food shortages, you have this war that's going on, violent protests and angry citizens. The radicals are thinking, these, Parisians that want very fast changes, they want, more rapid change to the government. They became even more radical, and they want to change things very quickly, and they started to attack the Legislative Assembly, and they developed their own commune within themselves and became a little bit more violent. And that commune was called the Paris Commune, but they called themselves the Sans-Culottes, right? And their basic purpose was to suspend the monarchy and call for a national convention. So again, they wanted to remove the king and queen altogether, not having a king and queen anymore, and having a national convention where they can establish something similar to what the United States of America created, right? So that's going to become even more problems for France, and it's going to develop into more issues with leadership and so forth, as you see soon. So thanks for listening, and I will see you in the next video.